closer in time.
Right now, today. Civil War military pilots. Long before the invention of the airplane, people took to the skies in balloons, or at least some of them did. A couple months after the start of the Civil War, Thaddeus Lowe, an established balloon engineer and aeronaut, demonstrated the potential value of manned balloons in military reconnaissance to President Abraham Lincoln. Within only a few days, the Union Army Balloon Corps, with Lowe appointed by Lincoln as chief aeronaut, was formed as a branch of the Union Army. Lowe and his modest contingent of aeronauts flew missions during several campaigns, including Bull Run, Yorktown, Fair Oaks, and Vicksburg. 2 years after its formation, the Balloon Corps were disbanded after the resignation of Lowe. Lack of appreciation in some circles of the military brass and disagreement over tactical implementation playing a major role. With numerous subsequent ventures, including refrigeration, railway, banking, and even having an entire mountain renamed after him, Thaddeus Lowe would live a life of accomplishment, affluence, and recognition. Jean Landis, the Women's Flying Training Detachment, and the Women's Air Force Service Pilots. The subject and inspiration for at least 2 biographies and 1 documentary, California native Jean Landis had always dreamed of flying as a young girl. She would soon in life actualize her aerial aspirations. During graduation rehearsal at San Diego Teachers College, where Jean was to receive her BA in physical education, the campus public address system announced the availability of 20 slots in the newly formed civilian pilot training program. Jean raced across campus, cap, gown, and all, a deft journey we imagine given her curricular athletics, and arrived at the dean's office to be first to sign up. Jean completed the program, earning her private pilot's license while concurrently commencing a career teaching at her alma mater, Grossmont High School in El Cajon. Some few weeks later, the United States entered World War II. In need of supporting the war effort, less than 1 year later, General Arnold, with Jacqueline Cochran at the lead, created the Women's Flying Training Detachment, or WFTEDs for short. Jean Landis, taking a military leave of absence from her still nascent teaching career to apply, would be one of only 1,074 out of about 25,000 applicants to be accepted and successfully complete training. History is replete with chronological wrinkles. 2 days before Jean's graduation, the Women's Air Force Service Pilots were formed by merging the WFTEDs with another women's paramilitary organization, the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron, which had been formed at about the same time as the WFTEDs. So while Miss Landis entered training with the WFTEDs, she graduated as a WASP. Over the short existence of the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, Jean, elected squadron leader near the end of training, would be tasked with numerous and progressively challenging responsibilities. She flew a number of aircraft. Biographers are sure to mention Jean's most memorable role was ferrying P-51 Mustangs, a fighter plane legendary to the era, from their point of manufacture in Long Beach, California, to New Jersey, where they were ultimately destined for combat in the European theater. Barely 1 year after Jean's graduating as a WASP, just when the Pacific and European theaters were intensifying, the organization was dissolved. When Jean returned to her teaching, she learned her military leave would not be honored. Despite sharing military facilities with enlisted, being subject to military discipline, assigned top-secret missions, directly serving Army logistics, and some WASP even being awarded service ribbons, Jean and her WASP sisters were technically not veterans. Additionally troublesome is that the U.S. government sealed the records of the WASP and its 2 predecessors. Much of the history of these heroic women were completely lost to history. 33 years later, under the Carter administration, the records were unsealed. A couple months later, WASP were given veteran status. About 32 years after that, WASP were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal. Throughout these legislative somersaults, Jean had returned to teaching, earned her master's degree, and after a 35-year career, enjoyed a lengthy retirement filled with travel and family. Certainly, the astronomical WASP training dropout rate was owed in great part to deficiency in applicants' physical ability and piloting requirements. Jean's hustle to enroll in the civilian pilot training program, as well as her training in physical education, serve as a great example of crafting one's fate. Jean's life spanned 44 days worth of World War I, the Great Influenza Epidemic, Prohibition, the Roaring Twenties, the market crash of '29, the Great Depression, World War II, of course, the moon landings, Woodstock, the dot-com bubble and bust, and the COVID pandemic, among many, many other things, of course. Miss Landis passed away near the end of 2022 at the age of 104. That's about 170 in Moses years, by the way. Such a long and rich life might be best celebrated as fortune rather than feat, out of respect for those many who died much too young in the face of great peril. Early Civil War military balloon piloting was closer in time to licensed pilot Jean Landis than we are now to her earning her pilot's license by about 5 years. Elisabeth Thible becomes the first ever female aeronaut. 5 years before the French Revolution, Francois Pilatrê de Rozier and Francois Laurent d'Arlandes made the first ever sustained human semi-controlled free flight. Their vehicle, a hot air balloon, basically an enormous pillowcase filled with smoke. In the proto-Zeppelin zeitgeist of the era, just a few days later, Jacques Charles and Marie-Noël Robert similarly flew a hydrogen-filled balloon some 22 miles from Jardin des Tuileries in Paris. Then, just 6 months later, Madame Elisabeth Thible joined Monsieur Florent for a free flight over Lyon, France. History is very clear of her contribution piloting, having been responsible for regulating heat and hence elevation of their balloon. What else does history tell us about Madame Thible? Nothing, really. There are no known extant records of her life, evidently. In fact, the date of her death is completely unknown, with modern chroniclers merely noting that she passed at some point after the flight. Newborn Jean Landis was closer in time to Civil War military balloon piloting than this Civil War piloting was to Elisabeth Thible's flight of a hot air balloon by about 22 years. And right now we are closer in time to newborn Jean Landis than she to Elisabeth Thible's flight by about 28 years.